Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game related controversy to my friends. Today, we're going to continue our look at Harvester with our exciting conclusion over this quirky little 1996 point and click adventure game developed by DigiFX Software and put out by Merit Studios. So, last time, we talked a little bit about Harvester's production and its development, and most importantly, its very, very long development cycle, which extended the game from what was supposed to be at one point an August 1994 release to several years later in 1996. And so today I'll be joined with resident Nintendo fan Andy Hunter and longtime programmer Kate Lynch as we wrap up our story of Harvester. Now, before I dive into the episode, I have two quick announcements. First, a really exciting announcement. So in 2 weeks, on April the 16th, instead of an episode specifically devoted to a video game controversy, we're going to try a first here at Scandalous Games, which is our first Scandalous Games interview. I'm super excited to share with you an interview I did with Aarno Malin. Now, Aarno is one of the leading experts on the internet on Harvester. He's the host of the Harvester Show, and he oversees the Harvester Facebook page, and he and I had a really awesome conversation. So I hope you'll check that out on April the 16th. The other thing I wanted to point out, we make mention a couple times of former U.S. Senator and long-time critic of violent video games, Joseph Lieberman. We have some fun little japes at Joe Lieberman's expense, including one where Andy Hunter likened him to a character from the 1980s TV show Elf. Well, one thing that happened in between when we recorded that episode and now when I'm recording this is Joe Lieberman died on March the 27th, 2024. So take that into account. We did this before he died, but on a certain note, I can think of no better tribute. So in honor of a former politician who took advantage of largely a manufactured moral panic over violent crime that led to a lot of less than great things, one that eventually led to an increased carceral state in the United States, such that we have the largest incarceration rate in the world, and pivoted that into a lifelong crusade against violent video games during what also happened to be an election year for him. I think I can think of no better tribute to him than this. So, happy trails, Joe. And with that, the thrilling conclusion of our look at Harvester.
Oh, please lose my number, Alf. Oh, I hate video games.
With Harvester finally ready for digital prime time, let's do a little role playing. We haven't done this in a while on the show. Imagine you're an executive at Merit Studios, and Harvester is finally ready to sell at long last. You need to make up for over 2 years of missed deadlines and broken promises to your stockholders, and you're sitting on a boondoggle of a game project that needs to somehow make you tons of money to recoup what you've poured into it. How do you market such a game? Do you A, throw it to the retailers, wash your hands of it, and hope for the best? B, invest more money into a slick advertising campaign that you hope will dazzle people into buying tons of copies? Or C, aggressively lean into controversy marketing and hope an opportunistic politician, pundit, or news program gifts you with a marketing-friendly moral panic? What do we think?
Well, previous subjects of this show have definitely gone Route C.
Yeah, I feel like Route C is certainly the most likely one.
Longtime listeners of this show will know that whenever I offer three choices, the answer is always C. And Merit Studios began a furious, some would say desperate attempt to play up Harvester's gory and sexually provocative content in the hopes that anyone would make a big deal out of their game and potentially inspire people to rush to their local Funko Land or software, etc., and grab as many copies as their bank accounts would allow.
You really only need one copy to play it. You don't need to buy copies.
But they need more than one copy so they can, stay in business.
I bought 4 copies in case 3 of them break. Yeah.
You know what? They can make up their money provided that Harvester only sells one copy, but we sell that copy for $2 million. On October the 2nd, 1996, Merit published a press release announcing Harvester's long-anticipated release, reminding reporters that the game allegedly exploded at the winter 1994 CES. I told you we'd go back to that. And prompted denunciations from a litany of news outlets. Denunciations that I've yet to come across in my research. So if you know of any, let me know. scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. Alongside game journalists calling the game, quote, stomach churning, end quote, and depraved. Merritt predicted/hoped, this is in the press release, by the way, that Harvester's digital debauchery would attract protest from the likes of the National Organization for Women, religious groups, and LGBTQ plus activists, with Merritt head Jack Irons declaring, quote, "We're going to turn some stomachs out there," end quote.
All right, so you're talking about LGBTQ organizations. I had always thought the ultra-offensive portrayals of gay people in the game that you alluded to at the beginning with the firefighters was something that the controversy they were trying to stir up there was simply gay people exist, which probably was at least part of it, but it sounds like they were also deliberately trying to offend LGBTQ communities with these knowingly offensive portrayals.
It's possible. Thinking about this in context of the way gay people were depicted in media at the time, this is depressingly mainstream, the way they're showing them. Because the whole thing is that the firefighters, and you can take some terms that people would describe someone who is gay that are associated with fire, that they are played as, lisping. All they talk about is art and painting. The fire engine is fucking pink. Like, they really lean into this. And it's like one of those situations where, like, you're trying to say something, but you're also doing the thing that is offensive. I think about,
I don't think they were trying to say, like, with their portrayal of these, over-the-top lisping, effeminate, speaking always in double entendres, harmful stereotypes. I don't think they were trying to say, look at this harmful stereotype, look how harmful it is. I think from what you just told me, it was both, let's court controversy on one side where it's like conservative people won't like being reminded that gay people exist, and also gay people will not appreciate this harmful stereotype that we're portraying them as. So I don't think they were trying to say, like, look at this harmful stereotype, we should do better. It was just, and we'll portray them this way, which will be harmful and upsetting.
I think that's fair. I think there's another part of that too, which is also like when you're depicting offensive stereotypes in media, even when you're satirizing them, you are still broadcasting them. I think about like the line that like South Park walks in terms of like, Cartman's aggressive anti-Semitism. And you can say up, down, and sideways how it's satirical. You should not relate to what Eric Cartman says. But at the same point, you are putting out a lot of offensive anti-Semitic or racist stereotypes that doesn't need to be out there. So that's the thing in here. Yeah, I think you're right. I think on one hand, they are courting controversy, but I would probably say on the other hand, even if they're trying to show this is a town where like all these things are messed up, you are still presenting an offensive stereotype. Like both are bad. Both are not good. Okay, so they're hoping someone's going to get mad at this game. And it sounds like they're kind of trying to cast a wide net about who gets offended and just hoping someone's going to get offended. So we'll offend gay people, we'll offend moral conservatives with all the sex and violence. We'll hopefully get, we'll trick Joe Lieberman into, presenting us before Congress. I think that's where Merritt is right now. I think Merritt's hoping somebody's going to get mad at this game. Really, really hoping that.
I'm going to call Lieberman at home and he's just going to pick up the phone and be like, stop calling me. Hang up.
Merritt also, in addition to all that stuff, Merritt also seasoned their online promotion for Harvester with a thick, sticky layer of edgelord marketing. Case in point, Merritt set up an official Harvester homepage where visitors were treated with a title page offering them two options to proceed to the main site labeled Wimps and Hardcore. Netizens bold enough to click Hardcore were taken to the game's main page, which included a list of stories that carried the game, links to reviews and press coverage, and tips and tricks on navigating Harvester's complicated puzzles. Those who selected Wimps, meanwhile, were treated to an animated gif of Pong with the statement, "Go play Pong, wimp!"
Hey, Pong is fun. Maybe I will. Maybe I will go play Pong.
Merritt also bought some advertising space on KEGL 97.1 FM, a local Dallas-based rock station that was also a Howard Stern affiliate. Reportedly, Harvester's ad, which I've yet to find a copy of, incensed some listeners in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to the point that it attracted at least one death threat. And Merritt was so thrilled, shocked, horrified, and concerned for the well-being of the staff at KEGL, that it started bragging about this threat of violence in their game that lampooned concerns over media violence in their promotional material. It's like, hot dog, someone got a death threat from our game. They also started making a very bold claim. Harvester's depictions of sex, violence, and even implied child molestation were so egregious, it inspired the creation of the ESRB itself, with that same press release from October 2nd, 1996 declaring, quote, "It seemed as if the Entertainment Software Ratings Board was formed virtually overnight in response to early versions of Harvester," end quote. That's a pretty bold claim, considering the first congressional hearing over video game violence that eventually sparked the creation of the ratings board took place on December the 9th, 1993, nearly a full month before Harvester's first teaser trailer debuted at Winter CES. I'm also pretty well versed in the ESRB. I wrote a dissertation chapter on the ESRB. I've read through the congressional hearings. I never saw a single mention of Harvester. No one talked about Harvester. And so either the game was so offensive that its content somehow bent reality around it to the point that no one who encountered it can remember it, a la the Marvel Comics character The Sentry, or Merit Studios is making this up. Now, whichever you truly believe, I leave up to you, true believers. I'm inordinately proud of that joke. I don't care if anybody laughs.
I'll say the joke had merit.
Thank you for your pity, Andy.
You're such a kidder, Kevin.
There it is. They said the line. Merit also furiously campaigned to get Harvester on every anti-video game moral crusaders watch list. Longtime listeners of the show will recall that in the wake of the moral panic over violence that led to the creation of the ESRB in 1994, numerous politicians, pundits, and self-proclaimed experts turned violent video games into their personal battleground in the war against the decay of the moral fabric of society. These included the Lion and Lamb Project, Common Sense Media, and our old buddies Dave Grossman and Jack Thompson. Another group we've also covered a bunch that may be a future episode in its own is the National Institute on Media and the Family. Formed in 1996 by a child psychologist named David Walsh, the Minnesota-based organization waged their war against the horrors of automobile Lamborghini on several fronts, such as creating informational material for parents and teachers, putting forth their own research into the alleged hazardous effects of various forms of media, and critically assessing the efficacy of industry-directed ratings and warning systems, such as the MPAA film rating system, the RIA's parental advisory label, and the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. The organization also developed strong connections with federal lawmakers, and NIMF representatives frequently appeared alongside politicians critical of video game content, such as Joe Lieberman and Hillary Clinton, to warn the public of video games' potentially negative impact on children. In early December 1996, NIMF launched what would be an annual event they hosted in Washington, D.C., where they would unveil their annual report card grading how well the video game industry was informing parents and retailers about the ESRB and how effective the system was at keeping those naughty video games out of the hands of children. As the signature piece of this event, NIMF unveiled a list of what they viewed were the most morally objectionable games on the market, usually punctuated by politicians like Joe Lieberman offering speeches where they could prove to their voters how much they were looking out for them in between torpedoing universal healthcare and greenlighting brutal wars that would last for decades. For NIMF's inaugural event, they unveiled two separate lists, the Dirty Dozen and the 10 Least Wanted Computer Games. Future lists would focus primarily on games put out that year, but for the first one, NIMF cast a wider net, including games put out over the last several years. According to a report on the event from the December 6, 1996 edition of USA Today, the Dirty Dozen, described by reporter Mike Snyder as, quote, hot video games with violence and other questionable content, end quote, consisted of the following. Does anyone want to guess before we do this, or do we just want to hear the list? So it's 1996. They're doing games up to 1996 that they thought were bad.
I feel like Doom must have been in it. Doom was what, 93?
Yeah, 93.
Duke Nukem, maybe?
Okay, Duke Nukem was 96, I think.
Yeah, was that MI2? You said it was 96.
No.
Phantasmagoria was 95, so that would have had to have been on there, I'm assuming.
All right.
Yeah, I'm coming up blank on others. Yeah, hit us.
Clock Tower?
Clock Tower. Ooh, good pull.
We talked recently privately about like things we regret in our lives. Only about 5 years ago, in the city that Kevin and I at the time were both working in, there was a CVS location right near one of the public transit stops that is now gone. But they had this little glass case, and inside it was a bunch of stuff that they still had VHS tapes, like plastic clamshell Disney tapes and stuff, and they had video games. And for I think it was $20, I could have bought Clock Tower 2 for the PS2, and I didn't do it. And then they closed. So I'm sad. I wouldn't have bought it to make my life's fortune. I just want to play it.
So here's the games they have. We can even do like, I know it's a non-visual meeting we do the old TikTok thing of like you can hold up a finger. We'll go games you've heard of, not even games you've played. So here's their list of this is the Dirty Dozens, the 12 worst games across all platforms that they thought of for 1996. Doom, first one off the bat. Fighting Vipers, that's a fighting game. I believe it's a Capcom fighting game, if I recall. Killer Instinct. Crazy Ivan. I had never heard of this fucking game. I looked it up. It's like a Mech Warrior style game that came out for the PS1. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. They don't make a distinction of which Power Rangers game they're talking about. Mortal Kombat. Primal Rage. I'm personally a fan of Primal Rage. I have an action figure of Armadon I got when I was a kid that I've treasured for a long time. Resident Evil, Revolution X. You remember that game? It stars Aerosmith. It's like, really? Revolution X on here? Fine, okay. Street Fighter 2, throwing back an old school game. I think that's the oldest game they've got on there. Virtua Cop and Virtua Fighter 2. So how many fingers we got holding up for these now?
I have 6.
I think I've heard of 8 of them.
Okay, it's not too bad. In terms of games, it's a pretty decent list. I wouldn't say that any of them are necessarily responsible for the decay of the moral fabric of society, although Primal Rage does have a finishing move where you can piss on an enemy until they dissolve. So fair play, Nymph.
Wait a second. Pissing on an enemy. He tapes. Maybe that is directly connected to the downfall of modern society. Allegedly.
Check out our Postal 2 episode.
Did somebody pee on somebody in the Postal? I didn't listen to that episode.
In Postal 2, there is an actual dedicated button for pissing on people.
Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, the following titles made their list of the 10 least wanted computer games. ATF. I've never heard of ATF. Crusader No Regrets, not to be confused with Crusader No Remorse. When I first was reading this, like, they're such fucking hacks. They got the game wrong, but I was actually wrong. Crusader No Regrets is an actual game. Daggerfall. Never heard of it.
Wait, Daggerfall, is that one of the Elder Scrolls games?
I'm looking this up now. That is Elder Scrolls 2. They didn't get the full name.
Think about it nowadays. How many people refer to the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim or just say Skyrim?
Daggerfall is a pretty dope cover.
Mm.
It's got like a skeleton face with a crown on it. It's got like a clawed hand reaching out. That's actually a pretty dope cover. All right. Doom, a game so bad it made the list twice. So Doom was both on the Dirty Dozen and on the least wanted computer games. Duke Nukem. We mentioned Duke Nukem. MechWarrior 2. Mortal Kombat, which not typically well known as a computer game, but okay, we'll put it on there twice. Why not? I don't usually think of Mortal Kombat as a computer game, but anyway. Pray for Death, which I've never heard of. I've never heard of this game. Looking this up. Pray for Death was, oh, that's right. I looked this up before. It's like a crappy, like, I can't say crap because I don't know if I've never played it before. It looks like a Killer Instinct knockoff. It's a 2D fighting game. The sprites look very much like Killer Instinct characters. Quake and Warcraft 2 were the other ones. So that's our Dirty Dozen, our 10 least wanted computer games. And calling out these games as the source of society's ills did not sit well for the folks at Merit Software. And on December the 6th, 1996, Merit and DigiFX put out a scathing press release calling out U.S. Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl, who both attended the event, and if you recall, were the main senators leading the congressional hearings on violent video games in 1993 and 1994.
And Lieberman is like, once again, stop calling me, please.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Please lose my number. I don't do a good Lieberman impression.
I feel like if you just have to do an impression of Willie from Alf. I feel like their voices are close enough. Like, oh, please lose my number, Alf. Oh, I hate video games.
So Merit and DigiFX put out this scathing press release calling out both Herb Kohl and Joe Lieberman, describing the two federal lawmakers as, quote, idiots, end quote, and hopelessly uninformed. However, the makers and producers of Harvester were not mad at Lieberman, Kohl, and the National Institute on Media Family because they thought the lists were part of a shallow political stunt, or that NIMP put out a lot of flawed or self-serving research. And for more on that, check out our episode on violent video games and our series on Dave Grossman, or that politicians like Lieberman and Kohl use violent video games as a scapegoat to distract from more substantive political issues such as poverty, institutional racism, or access to guns. Instead of all that, Merit and DigiFX were mad because these moral crusaders neglected to include Harvester on their lists. Come on, David Walsh, help a troubled production out with some free advertising. We're trying to keep the lights on here.
I feel like there's a joke to be made about reaping what you sow and Harvester, but I'm not getting there. Listeners, write in with your jokes.
Scandalous Games Podcast and gmail.com. From DigiFX head Lee Jacobson from that press release, quote, how can parents seriously believe the rating of Child's Play like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers amongst the worst games on the market when games like Harvester are the worst around, end quote. Later adding, quote, I guess that having a baby's eyes pop out, depicting cannibalism of various kinds, self-immolation with a battle axe, and other scenes of ultra-violence, all done by transferring live-action film to digital disc to rather realistic effects, isn't disturbing enough for for the good old senators or the NIMF. By failing to note Harvester, as well as other games such as Phantasmagoria and Phantasmagoria 2, A Puzzle of Flesh, the senators are unintentionally misleading the American public, end quote. Every opportunity can be a marketing opportunity if you think hard enough. Meanwhile, Merit Studios head Jack Irons added Harvester's exclusion, quote, is a disservice to the American public. This game was created to be totally violent in an effort to dissuade players from letting violence into their own lives. Harvester actually addresses our desensitization to violence and puts it in its place, end quote. The press release ended with some helpful contact information in case the media wanted to give Harvester some free advertising. I mean, get its maker's side of the controversy they were sure was going to follow this press release, even helpfully offering to send B-roll footage from the game for use in news segments and the names of several people willing to sit down for interviews in an eagerness to court controversy that borders kind of on desperation. It's kind of sad.
Well, yeah, but I can also imagine, well, I don't know. I don't know how people making the news back then were getting pointed at like which video games to harp on about. But so I can imagine if I were, like, oh, well, man, everybody's talking about Mortal Kombat, but what is my news show gonna do to set us apart? Maybe I'd be interested in hearing about a new one. But yes, I can also imagine like, oh, wait. Somebody wants me to cover them in a negative light. Oh, well then, no, I go where the people's eyeballs are already pointing. If nobody's talking about this game, then I don't care about it.
Well, and they're trolling, right? Like, I mean, in this year we're talking about Doom, right? Doom made the list not once but twice that you just talked about. So, like, video game scandals were a thing that made the news and, were popular and fueled conversation. But there's also, this is maybe not the best example, but the first thing I can think of is when I'm on TikTok with some regularity, I'll see recipe TikToks, let's say, and there are people who sort of deliberately mispronounce certain words in, say, the ingredients list or whatever, just because they know people are going to get upset, go to the comments, comment, engage, and then drive them up in the algorithm. So, like, there's one person who I watch who consistently pronounces the word tortilla, or tortilla. Like, he will always pronounce that word wrong. And it's on purpose because he wants people to be like, oh my God, how did you pronounce it that way? Why'd you do that? And then, again, you get what you want, the attention. And in this case, it's engagement with the algorithm that gets it right in front of people's faces instead. There was not such an algorithm back then, but honestly, I could only imagine what the TikTok ad campaign for Harvester would have been like.
I would like to see, I'm sure. Because it's not uncommon for like small indie games to advertise on TikTok and hope to get viral. Like that's how I heard about Lies of P, for example, where some of them just get picked up and then they gets enough attention, gets picked up by the larger mainstream like news sites and gaming sites and all that stuff. I wondered if one of the reasons that Night Trap got the attention it did was there's reason to believe that Nintendo just started sending curated footage to lawmakers. And so they basically hand it to them. And I have kind of a belief that, especially with all the research into Dave Grossman, that a lot of Moral Crusaders are, for lack of a better term, lazy, reactionary, don't want to do a lot of work. In fact, actively avoid doing a lot of work, want people to hand them controversies that they can make hay out of. And I feel like what I would do is, if I was marketing for Merit, I would invest a little bit in postage and start mailing this to people. Mailing copies of the game to Joe Lieberman, mail copies of the game to Herb Cole, mail copies of the game to, I don't know, the press or whatever. It's a simpler time where you can just send, random packages to various public figures that maybe Harvester would have gotten that. It's almost like they needed to do the legwork for people, especially because the PC gaming scene is really, really crowded in the 1990s. It's really hard to stand out. There would have been a dozen games like Harvester that we may not really know about or think about that would have wanted this kind of attention too. It's an example of a small, and even going back to Night Trap was at least had a bigger reach than this game did. Like Night Trap was, I think I heard a number somewhere, don't quote me on this, but like I think about a half of Sega CD owners had a copy of Night Trap, if for no other reason than the software library is very limited. Whereas like Harvester is a PC game. There are tons of PC games in 1996. And so it's very hard for them to get exposure. I have no idea what their marketing budgets are like. The fact that they're marketing in like a local Texas radio station tells me they didn't have a lot of money for advertising. So yeah, a lot going against them. And I think what they're hoping is that they put this out for the press, that the press will pick this up. And because the whole thing with press releases is that you have a curated article that you don't need to really do any work on, that you can put out as it is, or you can pull out the talking points. And I guess just nobody really picked this up, because skipping ahead, nobody really took the bait on this. No one picked up on this. So yeah, we got a lot of pushing, hoping that the media or somebody's going to make a fuss about this game. So hopefully get it some more free attention, some free publicity, and maybe lead to sales. And we've seen this attempt in other games. We see it again in Postal a year after this. However, I don't think that the news reporters ever came calling for Harvester, and religious crusaders and social justice advocates never said Harvester in their sites. I haven't come across any news reports even mentioning it, let alone denouncing it, outside a November 5th, 1996 article picked up by a New South Wales-based paper called The Australian, which focused more on the game's troubled development than as a source of moral outrage. On top of that, self-reported sales figures from Merit reveal that Harvester was likely never more than a modest seller, with Merit head Jack Irons explaining to that same reporter from The Australian, the game sold through its initial production run of 30,000 copies and was close to selling out its second run of 15,000. However, it's likely Harvester never came close to evening out the losses from what had to be high production costs, compounded by nearly 3 years of development hell. I heard a report early on their budget was $1 million. I'm sure they ended up spending way more than that on this game. FMV type games are expensive. This kind of production is expensive. Renting a green screen is expensive. Like, they would have had to sell a lot of copies to offset those costs on top of taking all this time to develop it. It was probably never going to recoup what they had put into it. With that in mind, you might be wondering what kind of critical reception the game attracted. And I found a spattering of reviews from the time it came out. And the consensus from this limited sample size is that critics thought the game was okay. I found no fan reviews from the time. Positives included the bold subject matter and strange David Lynch-inspired presentation, while negatives included its outdated design and ponderously long dialogue trees. Few failed to note that Harvester was a bit late to the party when it came to computer games with provocative content. While horror had been a lean genre on PCs in 1994, that was definitely not the case in 1996. And Harvester now had to face unfavorable comparisons to the likes of Phantasmagoria, Darkseid 2, and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. As Chris Hudak observed in a 6.8 out of 10 review for GameSpot, quote, a year ago or two, or whenever we all got excited seeing the first ads for this game, it might have been a cutting-edge title. Since then, we've seen Darkseid 2 and Phantasmagoria and games of that nature, so Harvester isn't cutting edge anymore, end quote. Speaking of Phantasmagoria, despite Gilbert Austin's assertions that Harvester was, and I quote, eating its lunch, taking its milk money, stealing its penthouses, then pissing on its leg for laughs, end quote, at Winter CES in 1994, by 1996, the critical tables had decidedly turned, and Phantasmagoria's presentation, with digitized live actors and fully acted and voice FMV scenes, made Harvester look like the relic of a bygone era. In fact, in the time it took to get Harvester ready, Sierra had nearly lapped Merit in DigiFX, releasing a sequel to Phantasmagoria titled Phantasmagoria Puzzle of Flesh, which came out a few weeks after Harvester. Woo! We will probably eventually do Phantasmagoria. Scott Wolf, a PC gamer, was much more favorable to Harvester than Hudak, despite calling out its dated design scheme and tedious, their words, dialogue trees. Wolf praised the game's boldness, citing its provocative content and mean-spirited, that's their words again, treatment of its characters, calling it, quote, a refreshing breath of foul air, end quote, and concluding in an 82 out of 100 review, quote, Harvester is undoubtedly going to come under critical fire, particularly from people who like to blame the entertainment media for the bad behavior of a few misanthropic miscreants, but its solid gameplay and thematic integrity will be appreciated by those with a genuine taste for the exotic. This is no lightweight Phantasmagoria wannabe, it's an unrelenting assault on your sensibilities from start to finish. If you like the movies Blue Velvet, Hellraiser, and Bob Balaban's Little Seen Parents, Harvester is right up your dark little alley.
Go watch those movies.
Good movies.
Go watch all of those movies. And don't play this game.
Those are good movies. Parents is an underrated film.
Yeah, Blue Velvet, Parents. What was the third? What was the second one? I forgot.
Hellraiser.
Yeah, I mean, go watch those movies. Go read Clive Barker's The Damnation Game. Go watch any number of David Lynch movies, honestly. Don't play this game. Don't play this game.
Play I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
Read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Or play it, or both.
Both good things. All right, skipping ahead. Harvester wallowed in obscurity for the next 2 decades as little more than a bizarre footnote in PC gaming history. However, this over-the-top deconstruction of moral anxiety over media violence received a second life thanks to the internet. On March 6, 2014, Night Dive, a company responsible for re-releasing a number of relatively obscure or forgotten 1990s games, re-released Harvester on GOG, followed by Steam on April 4th, 2014, thus exposing the game to a new generation of potential harvesters who embraced it as much for its value as a mid-1990s PC gaming oddity as for its not-so-subtle commentary on media violence. As of this recording, the game has over 900 reviews on Steam, and the overwhelming majority of them, 91%, are positive. And it averages a 3.9 out of 5 among verified users on GOG. It also frequently appears on compilations of the weirdest games of all time, and has received attention from several Let's Play channels who, again, just embrace the fact that how fucked up and weird this game is. For example, between September 22nd, 2022 and January 29, 2023, the Game Grumps ran a 6-part series running through the entirety of Harvester, which I alluded to at the very beginning, averaging over 573,000 views per video. So a lot of people are exposed to this game now. And in preparation for today's episode, I have played through a bunch of Harvester. Now, I will say I haven't finished it. I made it through the first half of the game. I got into the lodge. I'm currently on the second level of the lodge as we're recording this, and it is an interesting game. I think one thing that didn't help for me was that I obviously did not come in not knowing what to expect. If someone had recommended this game to me, like to not go in knowing anything about it, probably would have changed my experience. I kind of knew all the big plot points. And so I made it through some of the plot points fairly quickly. In some ways, I'm desensitized to this, having been exposed to Harvester's specific content. It does really lean heavily on things like the sexual innuendo. It's everywhere in that game. You see a lot of the sort of over-the-top weirdness through a bunch of the game. The second half of the game in particular gets very H.R. Giger. It's like a lot more visceral, and it's a lot more overtly violent. Its combat's also not particularly good, in my opinion. Its combat largely boils down to...
Click as fast as you freaking can.
Exactly. Furiously clicking and hoping that you don't take very much damage. And conserving, for example, like really important items like shotguns. You get a shotgun later in the game. Ranged weapons are essential in certain parts, and make sure you only use them like shotguns and nail guns if you absolutely have to, because you can be in a position like where I am, where I had an enemy late in the game who was a ranged attacker who I couldn't get close to attack with my weapon and would just constantly kill me and basically soft lock the game for me. Fortunately, I'd saved far enough back that I was able to get more health items and ranged weapons. That's not just characteristic of Harvester, that's characteristic of a lot of point and click adventure games. You can inadvertently fuck yourself over, and you gotta hope that you've got a better save further back. It is pretty upfront about what it's trying to do, what it's trying to say. Like if you can actually go to the TV station in the game, and the guy who runs the TV show, the one I told you about, where got his foot stuck through a Native American actor. There's parts where he shoots a person, like their guts pour out and everything. It's very unsubtle. It's an extremely unsubtle. You're not looking for nuance when you play Harvester. And like the child molestation stuff is a little creepy. It's actually a lot creepy. There's a lot of implications about child violence and child sexual assault, it seems like it's kind of edgy for the sake of edgy. But I guess there could be that question of like, oh, well, where's your line when it comes to media violence? I guess that's mine. There's some shots that seem like they're overt references to Psycho. There's a scene where Stephanie's dad peeps on her through a hole in the bathroom. And there's a shot where it's...
That was a Psycho reference?
There's a scene where you see his eye looking towards it. That reads like that scene. There's a scene like that in Psycho, if I recall.
There is. I did not make that connection, personally.
Also, there's an officer named Deputy Loomis, which feels to me like a Psycho reference. It could also be a Halloween reference.
Or a Scream reference. Or a Final Destination reference.
There's some yikes moments. The gay slurs that are thrown around referencing the firefighters made me uncomfortable. And it's trying stuff. It's trying to say stuff. And some of it seems to work. I will say that there are some moments that I either gasped or kind of laughed in spite of myself. So there were some things that I kind of enjoyed with it. I kind of, not say enjoy, but kind of grew accustomed to the combat. I will play through it. I will see it through to the end. I've seen how it ends, but like it's definitely an experience you wouldn't expect, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if that's a recommendation or not, but you could probably also get the same experience by watching a Let's Play video, and you could have it be done in a set amount of time as opposed to me picking up and putting it down again. Another shocking thing, you also learned you can kill NPCs. A lot of NPCs are killable. Some of them can soft lock your game by doing that, but like once I first realized that you could do that, I just walked up to a guy and punched him and had him died. I wanted to test that on everybody. And just like literally this one guy, you punch him, and he just goes, and his head falls off, and it was like, oh my God, what just happened? So there are moments like that that I thought were amusing.
Was there not much keeping his head on, or is your character Rainbow?
I guess so. So yeah, it's your mileage may vary. There are parts that looking back, I feel uncomfortable playing with it. And it's not so much for the things that the over-the-top gore I have less of a problem with. It is, I kind of expect that stuff from PC gaming at the time, because PC gaming tended to push things. Phantasmagoria came around the same time. So yeah, your mileage may vary. Like I said, if you want to try it yourself, the game is less than $2 right now on Steam. But I suppose all that brings us back to that question I started with. How did a game so tailor-made for controversy fail to leave any impact commercially, culturally, or on the industry when it came out in 1996? And why didn't it get the kind of moral backlash of contemporaries like Mortal Kombat or Night Trap or, Postal, which came out a year after this? And I think a lot of it comes down to the timing. In 1994, there were different expectations over what was acceptable in a computer game compared to 1996. And the rollout of the ESRB in late 1994 placed video game content under greater scrutiny. So there was an opportunity there that maybe if Harvester had come out in August of 1994, if it had somehow met that impossibly huge deadline, if it had somehow done that, then maybe it might have been a conversation piece when it still had the press and when it still had some attention. Maybe Joe Lieberman would have pointed to that bloody skull in Stephanie's bedroom as a sign that the industry needed to do better to protect America's children. I will say as an aside, because I didn't point this out, that bloody skull scene that you saw in the videos that they mentioned on the back of the box is at the midway point of the game. It's a while before you get there. They played that up in a bunch of places. But anyway, so it's possible that it might have gotten attention, or maybe it wouldn't. I mean, PC gaming was pretty crowded. 1994 was still the era where Doom was the big game in PC gaming, where Doom is taking a lot of the air from everything else, and everything's kind of compared in relation to Doom. So it's possible that it would have been lost in the shuffle, but we don't know. I mean, we may never know. And a lot of the question with Harvester is, as a game to attract conversation, is a lot of what if, because it really didn't get that kind of backlash or moral outrage. You're not seeing Joe Lieberman, you're not seeing Jack Thompson. Jack Thompson probably never heard of Harvester. Dave Grossman's never heard of Harvester. I mean, Dave Grossman,
Nobody tell him.
If you sat Dave Grossman into a room and told him that you were going to lock him in there forever unless he named 3 video games, I don't think he could do it. I don't think he could do that. But Harvester, it comes and it goes. It's a game that seems like so perfectly made for controversy that just, and I think one thing that's important to acknowledge on Scandalous Games is the scandals that didn't happen. And Harvester is definitely the example of the scandals that didn't happen. Anybody else want to add to that? I feel like we're dominating the conversation there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just hard to believe, but not everybody can do what Vince Desi can do, I guess, in terms of just really getting eyeballs on his game.
Yeah, maybe if Harvester had tapped more into the, the cultural zeitgeist in a way that, Postal, its name, tapped into something people were talking about. People were talking about going postal. The U.S. Postal Service was very sensitive about that for very understandable reasons. And maybe if Harvester had been called something else, I don't know. Let's see, what's in the news in 1996? We've got, I don't know, OJ's Killerama or something. A Buttafuoco game, a Menendez Brothers game. Again, I'm using these as like ghoulish attempts to capitalize on things that were popular, quote unquote, popular in the sort of modern cultural conversation in a way that like Postal did with, the term going postal. Harvester didn't have that. Harvester has more artistic integrity than Postal. I don't think that's a stretch to say. But what's interesting is some people did weigh in who were involved in the game on Harvester's lack of an impact, and several people connected to the game cited Harvester's delays as a key reason why it failed to make any meaningful impact. And so, for example, Gilbert Austin, the creative lead of this game, he blamed Future Vision / DigiFX and company head Lee Jacobson in particular, explaining to Aarno Malin, quote, "I blame the programmers, but really I should say that the programming is what killed us. And if the programmers were slow for whatever reason or needed help or needed a good kick in the pants, in the end, that was Lee's job to make that call. And whatever ultimately happened, he was responsible," end quote. He also thought Merritt did a poor job of marketing the game when it eventually did come out, saying, quote, "That vast delay between finishing all the creative elements and implementing the technical elements stalled the momentum we had in terms of publicity and public anticipation. And I think by the time it actually came out, people had forgotten about it. Plus, the marketing geniuses had the idea of advertising Harvester solely on the radio. Can you imagine the immense stupidity of that decision? Advertising a computer game on the radio, a medium where gamers couldn't see the provocative graphics, the gameplay, between the lengthy delay in releasing Harvester and the lack of advertising support, Harvester never got the exposure it could have had," end quote. Meanwhile, Dustin Nulf, one of Harvester's programmers, told Malin the delays worked against Harvester, putting the game in competition with bigger controversial titles such as Mortal Kombat and Phantasmagoria, saying, quote, "We took way too long to produce the game, and the hype wave had already crashed. Phantasmagoria didn't help much either. Mortal Kombat was just as graphic too. The game already looked dated by the time of its release," end quote. And there's certainly plenty of blame to go around, and I feel a bunch of that has to rest on Merit too, the publishers, as they had several games being worked on by several other development teams that also failed to come out on time. So you might recall, I said they promised they'd have 10 to 12 games out by the end of 1994. I looked into a bunch of them, a fraction of that came out. Maybe one or two came out. So for example, they had this game called the Psychotron that came out, but games like Cyber Judas, I think I mentioned that before, that didn't come out until 1995. Of course, Harvester didn't come out until 1996. They had a bunch of games that they promised, and just none of them really panned out the way they hoped. Is it the developer not being able to live up to expectations, or is the publisher making too high of expectations? And so I think Merit has to bear some of the blame for Harvester. But what's really interesting is it's possible that Harvester's failure, both as a moral panic and a consumer product, is more of a product of poor business planning and the rapidly changing times of 90s gaming scene than it was for its content. And like, this is one of those what if stories. And like, what if they had gotten their act together? What if they had a more directed creative vision? What if they had more realistic timelines? And maybe we'd be talking about Harvester. Who knows?
Well, here's my main question. So, about that. I brought up the Event Horizon example earlier. Do you feel like the people making Harvester set out to make a good game? Or do you think that they set out to make a game that would generate controversy? Like, nobody sets out to do crappy work, but you can put out a game that is functional. I mean, it is bug-free, pretty much. I mean, from what we've played, right? I mean, it's not, you can play it, and those dialogue trees are a little exhausting, but they're extensive, they're there. It's a competently made game. It's just, it feels to me like it's a game that is designed to generate controversy and nothing else. And without the controversy, then it has nothing to stand on. And so I guess, yeah, that's my question is like, did they set out to make a game that would generate controversy? If so, they did a good job of doing that, of making that game. Or did they set out to make a game that could stand on its own, and then through a bunch of different circumstances, as you said, like there's, more time, more money, etc., and the studio just kind of panicked and had to find a way to try to, recoup losses, tried to then drum up controversy? I honestly don't know.
It's a good question. After reading a bunch of like interviews and recollections from people and some writings from some of the news reports they did in the 1990s when they're making Harvester, I think that in some respects, I think Future Vision was hampered by the weight of their own ambition. It sounds like they had a really big plan for this game. Again, that CG looks pretty good from the teaser trailer from 1994. That's pretty darn impressive. And like hearing what Kevin Obregon explained, how like he seems to really feel like they had some of the best 3D programmers. I think they really thought that they were going to have this big, ambitious project. And I think that ultimately when they sat down to do it, then again, this is me speculating, I think then they faced the weight of that ambition and then had to do a lot of adjusting and a lot of changing. And it seems like from the press things that Gilbert Austin said at the time and stuff he said and stuff people have said about working with him, I've read a couple of things from a couple of the actors, it sounds like he really genuinely believed that this was going to be like that this was going to be a big artistic statement. People who worked with him seemed to think that he really did believe in this, that he really did think that he was going to make this big artistic statement through games. He's extremely ambitious. And I think at the same point that Future Vision may have had a situation where they were extremely ambitious too, and then ultimately kind of reality set in. That being said, it's not necessarily mutually exclusive that they were also trying to drum up controversy, but it sounds like they were also trying to make a big swing. I think that there was ambition where like reading about Postal, I think Postal was a simple, functional game made by guys who had worked in the industry for a long time, making simple, functional games. Mike Riedel, who was the lead programmer on Postal, had worked for over 10 years working with publishers. He knew how to make a game. He knew how to put things out on time, where I think that was something like Lee Jacobson didn't have a lot of experience in. And so in those respects, those guys realized that the important thing is to get the game out. Get the game out on time, make sure it's out when it has to be, and then market the shit out of it to try to get the attention. I think that Future Vision, was in some ways overburdened by their ambition. But that being said, it doesn't mean they also didn't think, oh, this is going to get a lot of eyes on us. And Merit Studios, that is, really then definitely tried to lean into that as controversy. It's really interesting that they don't really try to talk about the technical merits of the game, maybe because at that point by 1996, they were pretty outdated. So that's my answer. It's kind of a long answer. All right. I thought we'd wrap up our tale with a rundown of what some of the key players in our story have been up to since Harvester. Let's start with the company formerly known as Future Vision, DigiFX. In 1997, DigiFX pivoted away from Harvester and attempted to carve a niche in real-time strategy games. And they promised several RTS titles over the next 2 years with names like Mission to Nexus Prime, Kaiju, and Undead Wars. Fun fact, Reportedly, the story for Mission to Nexus Prime was going to be written by Timothy Zahn, best known at the time for writing the Thrawn trilogy of Star Wars Extended Universe novels.
The Thrawnlogy? Wow.
Thrawn is a pretty big figure among Star Wars nerds. They've more recently been integrating Thrawn into the mainline Star Wars continuity. But yeah, the Thrawn trilogy was pretty big among Star Wars fans from the extended universe in the 1990s. So that's kind of a big get. In any case, none of it saw fruition. None of those games came out, I mentioned, and DigiFX shut down on October the 27th, 1997. In 1999, former company head Lee Jacobson took a job working for Virgin Interactive Entertainment, so it's possible he was a co-worker with our old friend Harvard Bonin. He went on to work for another 13 years in the games industry at Virgin, Midway, and Atari. Merritt also got out of the games business. In fact, I found a press release where they said that they had failed in the computer game business. They actually said it was a failure. They restructured in March 1999 and shifted into an electronic book publishing house before shifting again to compression software in 2000. The SEC, meanwhile, the Securities and Exchange Commission, suspended stock trading on Merritt in 2012, and as far as I can tell, this company no longer exists. There is a New York-based company called Merritt Software that specializes in teacher professional development materials. However, I looked into that company. They're not the same company. They just have a similar name. Gilbert Austin, he kept trying to make it as a writer and an actor. He had a series of small projects over the years. And in 1994, he formed his own game studio called Maelstrom Software. He did this after he had done his work on Harvester, through which him and his small team and Future Vision created the Fortress of Dr. Radiaki, which he wrote and starred in. And fun fact, on January the 30th, 2023, the Fortress of Dr. Radiaki received a re-release on Zoom platform, a digital game storefront that I had never heard of. So I guess you can check it out there. I think it's also about $6. According to IMDb, he also has 2 voice credits on Western dubs of anime. For example, a 1990 episode of a show called Nadia the Secret of Blue Water, and a 1998 OVA called Getter Robo Armageddon. He also appeared in a 2010 movie called The Magnificent Dead, which is a Western involving a band of hired guns with leprosy that also has zombies in it. It's on Tubi. I watched like 10 minutes of it, and it's like low budget, like student film. Like it's very, very cheap. In 2011, he produced, wrote, directed, shot, edited, costumed, sound designed, and starred in a film called My Naked Villainy, a movie where a director stages Othello to get revenge on the lead actor who stole his girlfriend. In 2012, he published Hamlet Z, a novel with a very late 2000s Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter / Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters premise of what if Hamlet but with zombies, which a 2017 Amazon review described as, quote, the premise is entertaining, although it complicates the story somewhat, end quote. And being a super pedantic English minor that I am, there already is an undead character in Hamlet, but okay. Kurt Kissler, who if we recall was the character model for Steve, has a few composer credits at IMDb. Oh yeah, he was also convicted of possession of child pornography in 2010 and again in 2016.
Yikes.
Yeah. However, I want to end this story on a happy note. So I'll wrap up with a brief look at Lisa Cangelosi, who played the character model for Steve's love interest, Stephanie. This comes from both her interview with Aarno Malin and her IMDb bio, which is so detailed for such an obscure actor that I gotta imagine that she wrote it. In 1995, she had a name role in She Fought Alone, a TV movie starring Saved by the Bell actor Tiffany Amber Thiessen. She received small, uncredited roles in the 1990s and performed in a musical group called Sirens in the early 2000s, not to be confused with the British musical trio or the metalcore band of the same name. Aarno Malin also found out she was a contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2012. She did not win the $1 million, but she was on it. And she acted in some local commercials in Texas. She recalled to Aarno in her interview published on his Harvester fan page in 2013 that the game's cult status was a pleasant surprise for her, explaining, quote, I'm pleasantly surprised that Harvester has a fan base. I remember hearing about the game getting terrible reviews from the critics, so I thought, oh well, I guess I'll never hear about this again. So it's really been nice, and I've appreciated that over the years. I've heard it mentioned so much, as well as my involvement in it. My first piece of fan mail I ever received as an actor was from a teenage boy Harvester fan who found me through my agent in Los Angeles. And even all these years later, I've received more fan mail for my role in Harvester than any of the other acting jobs I've done combined. End quote. She became a born-again Christian, and today she sings at her local church. And so that's where we'll wrap up our long, sordid tale of this sordid game, Harvester. Final thoughts?
I like how she wasn't worried at all about how that teenage boy somehow found her and sent her a piece of fan mail to her house. That would concern me. I'm sure it's fine. That sticks out to me. Because, like, having played through the game and her character, and it's like, what did you like so much about my character? when you got to murder me a whole bunch. I love the part where you were stripping naked and your stepfather was watching you. I love the part when you had sex with Steve. And I especially love the part where I got to murder you with a scythe. Anyway, can you sign this and maybe lick it and then mail it back to me? Thank you.
Well, I guess, yeah, they just did not harvest as much controversy at the time as they wanted, but I'm happy for those involved that it's gotten a bit of notice since then.
Andy, I feel like if we were in person, we'd have to like hold hands right now. I just got it. You reap what you sow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's why the Roadrunner cartoons are back on Max now, is thanks to the game's resurgence in notoriety.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. I first heard about this game through I think one of those What Culture or Watch Mojo listicles of like I think I might have first come across it when I was doing the research into the ESRB episodes, and I did more digging into what the gaming scene was like when Night Trap came out. And I think I came across one of those lists of the weirdest FMV games. It's like, what the hell? I'll check that out. And that's where I saw Harvester for the first time. And like there's a scene of the sheriff. So we saw it in the teaser. This is fleshed out more in the game where Steve is looking over at Stephanie's bed and you see the bloody skull with the spinal cord on it. And the sheriff is sitting there. He's eating pie while it's like, yeah, a person can't live without a spinal cord and died of natural causes. Like, what the hell is this game? And that kind of got me looking into this. And Kate and I, we saw that the Game Grumps did an episode on this. So fine, we'll sit and watch the whole thing because I'd watched an analysis of it years ago and just didn't remember very much of this. And I thought, you know what, there's probably a really interesting story behind this game. And I was really happy to find that when I started digging and found, the Harvester show with some of the resources there, and it's like, and just doing a bunch of my own research, like there actually is a pretty interesting story behind this game. And it's not necessarily about, the fucked up content that it's got. And it's only got its fair share of fucked up content, but more about like, this troubled production and then this attempt to really try to, recoup losses, and then reading about some of the development of it and how the creators really thought that this was, I feel like there's an earnestness to this. You think about like why do certain things become cult classics? And a lot of that is an earnestness. Like you see people like Tommy Wiseau. Like Tommy Wiseau, you can tell this was a vanity passion project for him to make The Room. And there's a certain dedication to like, I think I'm making art. And people enjoy it, but they enjoy it for reasons that you don't realize. I feel an earnestness to Harvester. I think there's an earnestness to this project. I read more about the earnestness. It's what seems to me to be an earnestness among the people who made it. And so I guess I can see the cult weirdness for it. Whether or not it really sticks the landing on its statements and what it says is trying to do is a whole nother question. I don't know if it necessarily does that. Like, I think it kind of undermines your message when you leave it at the end, a kind of very superficial choice at the end of the game, when you insist that the character do specific actions to progress, and then effectively judge them for that and say, well, this is the terrible things you caused because you did those things. Even if you didn't mean to cause harm, you caused harm. We'd even talk about how, like, when he burns the diner down, the owner of the diner hangs herself. And if her daughter is still alive, spoiler, she will hang her daughter too. And like, you can talk about like how it conveys the message it's trying to say and how effective it's doing that. But there's also, you can see kind of I kind of read through kind of a passion and people really believing in this thing. And it's like, I was just happy to find that this was an interesting story. I was really ready for this to just be like a little footnote that I didn't have very much. And this is actually one of the longer scripts I've written for this. So yeah, that's pretty cool. From a video game history nerd, I think that's kind of fun. So why don't we wrap up? Thanks for putting up with me today. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seekly by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.